Running Wild with Christine, Sex, Success, and Other Slippery Rabbit Holes. Episode 3, on loneliness and why we write. Hi, welcome back to Running Wild with Christine. I'm Christine Wild, as always, author of the newly released memoir called Just Bad Timing, in which I recount my thoughts on postmodernism, my raucous trysts, and take you around the world in an often hilarious personal quest for meaning. It's an exploration of intimacy and modern relationships in the age of Tinder, the gig economy, and social media-induced FOMO, which poses lots of timely questions like, what do real love and success entail? And how do we navigate the expectations we set for ourselves while carrying the weight of expectations others set for us? Why is it so damn difficult for women to embrace their sexuality and speak proudly about it? So that's why we're also here today. This podcast is a safe place to ask all the questions you might be afraid to ask or never knew who to speak to or why and how. And so me and friends answer those questions for ourselves. So today is actually a really topical episode. I am here with Matthew.
Hey, thanks for having me.
No worries. Matthew is a friend of mine who is also a writer of a book whose title in progress is When the Yellow Cat Yawns, and it has nothing to do with cats, apparently.
No, very little.
But basically, Matthew and I met in February of 2017?
Yeah, yep, that sounds right, yeah.
So about just over a year ago. And how did we meet, Matthew?
As all relationships start out these days, we met on Tinder. So,
That's right. We met on Tinder, but we didn't quite meet on Tinder like everyone else meets on Tinder. We met on Tinder in Belgrade, where there's no one on Tinder.
Yeah, that's true. It's very bare, though. Compared to Sarajevo, it's a gold mine.
So yeah, for anyone willing to travel to Sarajevo, get your Tinder action going. So yeah, personally, I had just moved to Belgrade. This is at the beginning of part 3 in my book, if you're a reader. And I was trying to finish this book of mine and living a quite lonely life, just perched up at my desk trying to get this shit done. And so Tinder was like the perfect procrastination. And then I think Matthew and I matched, and he's like, what do you do? And I was like, well, I'll write a book. He's like, no fucking way. That sounds about right. I honestly don't think I would have told you I was a writer unless, if you hadn't said, I'm writing a book, I would have never probably told you. What would you have said? I would have been like, what's this random Australian guy doing living in Belgrade?
Yeah, I probably would have said nothing or or traveling or something like that.
Yeah, for anyone who's on Tinder, never say nothing. That's like the conversation stopper. Don't do that. But anyway, so we went for a crazy night out, had some Belgrade drinks as you do, and then this cool intellectual, dare I say, friendship came out of it.
That's such a stretch.
But basically, why Matthew and I wanted to do an episode today is because we bonded in our friendship over trying to be creative people and living in sort of lonesome places for people like us. And we both have this like weird, thing for philosophy. So bear with us today if we start going a little like too far down a philosophy rabbit hole. We'll try to stop ourselves.
Would you say we bonded over long dead white guys and their ideas?
That's right.
I think you said, yeah.
Oh, long dead white guys. Never ending source of inspiration. But basically, so if you read the book or if you know anything about me, I'm half Serbian. So I decided to move to a place where I had an empty apartment for free and I could live there freely. Matthew, however, has a weirder reason for being in Belgrade. Do you want to give us the 2 cents background?
So I ended up in Belgrade because my Schengen visa was due to expire, and I had to get out of Schengen. And the cheapest flights from Madrid were to Belgrade at that time, so that's how I ended up in Belgrade per se. But I was in Europe because I was waiting for my Polish citizenship to go through.
And it still hasn't, so it's been 2 years.
And it's been 18 months and it still hasn't happened, so yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I'm taking advantage of having Matthew on the same continent for a little bit longer before he heads back to Australia and faces that dreadful return. But I guess we'll do another episode of coming back home after being a weirdo loner on the other side of the planet. But speaking of being a loner, so this is something that I sort of struggled with when I was writing before I published. I mean, I still struggle with it, but a little differently, is that people are like, so what do you do? And like Matthew implied, we don't necessarily always say I'm a writer unless you have something published, because it's like this imposter syndrome of, I can't be a writer if I didn't have anything to show you that I wrote. Which sucks, by the way, and is completely wrong, and we shouldn't think like that, but it's just, for now, how we do. And so I think for me, that was like a major source of like anxiety, is that I would sit like and stare at my thoughts and at my computer for like endless hours. And I think if it weren't for people like Matthew, or people that, understand that process of introspection, you sort of like have no place in society where you can be like, yo guys, this is really hard. Like, this is more difficult than having a mortgage and a 9-to-5, is that I sit here like shooting my own self in the foot repeatedly. And I think, Matthew, you like sort of have a lot of things to say about that, don't you?
But I don't know why anyone would choose to do this per se, because it's such an isolating lifestyle.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the trade-off. It's what we have to do kind of what we want to be creative, and you need that time. But yes, it's very lonely. And then even when you do find some people, like there's always the danger of cliques, I suppose. Whereas even then you fall into these cliques, and you can kind of get lost in that. So
are you talking about like the way
writers cliques?
Oh, the nice positive feedback loop.
Yeah, and you can fall into that, or you can even not fit into those cliques, which is just more depression waiting around the corner for you then, I suppose. But yeah, it's a lonely, boring kind of existence, and it's also great at the same time.
Yeah. We're making it sound really good, aren't we? So basically, Matthew and I have a little bit of a different parkour to get to where we are today. I studied international relations, which on paper sounds like a marketable skill, but essentially I focused on critical theory and philosophy of power and politics and things like that. So I spend a lot of time with long dead white guys in a sort of legitimate space, which is university. Matthew comes from marketing.
Please don't hate me. Well, not based on that. So I did marketing. My background's marketing, and in university, and then when I went out, I did accounts.
Oh my
God. A bit of accounts and a bit of marketing as well.
Riveting.
Riveting stuff.
So how
you can see why I'm used to boredom. when my 9 to 5 was filling out spreadsheets, and it's like, oh.
Yeah, I should mention the book that he's writing that isn't about cats is about boredom, which is going to be a fascinating read. I'm really excited. But I wanted to ask you, so how did you get into this study of critical thinking? Because for me, it's like one of the major arcs that I use within the book and in my life in general is sort of the perpetual questioning of language and things we say and frames of thought and the system that we built as a society and sort of being always aware of what the assumptions behind it are, even if, sometimes you can't do much about it, just being aware of where they come from and how we perpetuate it with language and stuff like that is something that I'm constantly aware of, but it comes from my university education. Whereas like, what was your, the sort of thing that made you go, oh, I'm going to spend time reading, intensely difficult philosophy.
Well, it was kind of always there in a sense, so I'm going to go really far back here. My sister and I like to refer to my father as a Marxist who hasn't read Marx. And
Yay!
And what we kind of mean by that is back in Australia, before Australia was really, really rich, like it's always been well off, but before it was really rich like it is now. My dad was a coal miner, worked in the mines.
Yeah.
And at that point there was a massive mine strike, and he was a union person. Mm-hmm. And so we were introduced, like, I can remember being down in, like, this is before OH&S and, like, for British people, health and safety. I can remember being in the open cut pit on the picket line with him. And so I was introduced that way to, like, it started off, like, that was always kind of there, this kind of solidarity. He got sacked, as most of the miners that happened to, and the mine didn't close, it got sold.
Yeah.
And then they brought in rules, which has led to the weird class divide we have in Australia now. Mm-hmm. But that's where it started. And then at uni, I still wasn't fully aware of Marx because, like, I'm sure most Western people know, maybe not the British, the Americans definitely know, you're not allowed to read Marx. In Australia, it's taboo.
However, if you're in any way Serbian, it's highly recommended read, by the way. just throwing it out there.
Oh, yeah. So I hadn't read him. I barely even knew anything about him. And then when I got to uni, I was introduced to Freud in marketing. In marketing, we use a lot of very weak psychology to manipulate people. And from that, you kind of, when you fall into Freud, it was just kind of like, well, Freud's interesting. So I read a little bit about Freud, and then the next logical step is to Mercuzzo.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you can't help but open the door, which took me to the two philosophers. And this might sound weird to people that know philosophy, but it took me to the two philosophers that I read and like the most, which is Marx and Heidegger.
Oh, and Heidegger.
I just know people now are just going, those two have nothing to do with each other whatsoever. But
and honestly, if you haven't read either of them, I mean, read Marx anyway, just for like a counterbalance to our Western imperialism. But like Heidegger, I personally have a hard time reading Heidegger. Yes, go on. This was my little tangent.
Well, that's it. Well, the reason that, if you don't know Heidegger, the reason Heidegger's weird compared to Marx is because, not that his philosophy is, but Heidegger himself was a Nazi. That's why that's weird. But,
yeah.
But there is a sect which I enjoyed to read called Hegelian Marxism, and that's kind of where my thought derives from. And Heidegger's the person to tie back into my book, which will probably never see the light of day, but anyway.
Come on. Just like
she loves it when I'm self-deprecating.
Oh yeah, it's my favorite thing about Matthew. But no, like seriously, I think there's a thing to reading quote unquote controversial writers, and also like every writer is controversial, so I think that's like a stretch. But Matthew is the kind of guy who on International Women's Day sends me this article about like why feminism isn't useful if it isn't socialist. And so if I have any American listeners here, be careful of the words we use. They don't have the same connotation in Europe as they do in America. So be a little open-minded to the socialist, like red flag that you're feeling inside of you if you've been buying into it.
I hear that sound. That's all of the people just clicking unsubscribe.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I mean, we're still like, this is where I was sort of getting to with this, is that Matthew and I love getting into these like deep long debates, total rabbit holes about, like what society could be like if we could actually express the things that we want to express without using the binary metric system that we've been given, or this without that isn't this, and just constantly butting our heads against like, well, this doesn't work, but we don't have something that works, so we're just going to like run around the things that don't work endlessly. But basically we still function as, this is debatable, but we still function as human beings within this capitalistic system. So we butt our heads all the time in society on, why we're still, if this creative pursuit is so lonely and difficult, and like, why do we write, and why do we put ourselves through this, and what's it gonna bring us? This is the big society question of like, why did you study philosophy? What you gonna do with that? Or, why are you writing about boredom? Who's gonna care? Or like, what's that gonna do? And how is that gonna be profitable? And this is like one of the most harmful questions, and I'm sure a lot of creatives know exactly what we're talking about, but you still have to answer that question for yourself, because you're still a human being with like, motivation issues. So you gotta...
And you have to eat and pay rent. and so, yeah. So...
Paying rent, who does that?
Rent.
But essentially, so I guess, like Matthew, what are you going to do with your book? Like, what do you say when people ask you that?
God.
Right?
Generally it's, I don't know, or we'll just see where it goes. You give something vague. But honestly, what am I going to do with my book? If I finish it, one, I'm stoked. And I don't know. It's just like, I don't think that you really have to do anything with it, per se. Yes. Like, obviously we'll try and publish it, but you don't, like, it doesn't mean, like, just the process of doing it and having it complete is great, but the process of doing it and trying to make sense of all this nonsense on the page is kind of fulfilling within itself.
Yeah, like, and I'm going to underline him saying trying to make sense and not making actual sense, because because nothing makes sense if you go that deep into fucking critical thinking. Like, it will boil your brain down to pieces. And I spent 4 years with my dear friend Nietzsche. If you've ever read Nietzsche, like, you'll know that you're not a productive person after it. Your brain is sort of left in a puddle somewhere in a library. For other people to sort of like pick up the pieces, but essentially, like, we were talking about why we write, and it's funny because now that I wrote the book and now that the book is out, I miss writing, because that's the fun part. I don't like the fact that I have to post on Instagram 3 times a day, and that I have to, come up with snack bites of articles to put on BuzzFeed so that people will read this hashtag sex memoir I wrote, because, there is a lot of sex in it. But I think greater than the sex and the relationships and the stories is my trying to understand the society that we live in today, which is so senseless to me. Like, we have so many contradictions, and so, like, more than the process of trying to make sense of it, I am now trying to open up that conversation, and I think that's sort of what writing does in the first place. But we don't have the patience to read that much anymore. So you find other ways to try and, like you were saying, if you were texting me some of the stuff that you write for your book, which he does, by the way, I wouldn't...
And she always says, delete that.
That's not true. I go like, well, I don't know what that means, but it's pretty. But what I think is that patience for debate and actual conversation that critical theory teaches you is the same patience as you would have to read philosophy or read, mentally demanding books, which I'm not saying mine is, but philosophy is.
Not mine.
Yours is a little more mind-bending than mine so far.
That's just because it's badly written, don't worry.
No, but there's something to be said about the exercise of, like, you go to the gym for your body, but what do you do for your brain, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's about for us. Well, I actually had a friend who said philosophy is like going to the gym.
It is.
So critical reading is like going to the gym. You have to start somewhere, and it's a lot of it's weight training. There's a lot of heavy lifting and a lot of rereading, a lot of stuff that might just be complete. Well, everything's complete nonsense. Yeah, and it could just be wrong, but it's still interesting.
Exactly, and that's why we still read Plato like millions of years later, is that there is, regardless of where you're standing, Matthew just rolled his eyes really intensely. But I think there's always, and this is one of the main points in postmodernist critique, is that there's something about where you stand, your perspective on whatever's written or whatever you're reading. And so I think it's like a lost art of just like enjoying, being in your own head. And this ties back into the lonely thing, is that when you let yourself be bored or like be completely isolated or be stuck with your own self, not only is it good therapy and it's pretty cheap, but also it's sort of tapping back into this human existence that we've shared with other humans for like centuries, that we seem to completely forget now that we have like Instagram and Facebook. We're like, oh yeah, snackable bites, whatever people choose to put out, that's probably who they are, and it's not who we are, and it's not how you live a fulfilling life in actual relationships with actual people around you. Like, I don't know if do you stretch that sort of like deep theoretical thinking into your personal life? Because that's sort of my mission, but I'm not assuming that's everyone else's.
Yeah. Well, it opens you up to, it opens you up and shows you where alienation actually is, and it shows you what it is and what is important. So, and then that is like the basic mode that we live in, is being with other people. And so, and it sounds weird, it sounds grim when you're like, you have to go away to kind of, like, you have to isolate yourself to kind of come to that very simple explanation. But it's kind of about this, but we live our lives with others, but sometimes we live them in a way that's not completely
true.
Yeah. True or honest. Yeah.
If we want to open a whole other can of worms, that's not really authentic.
I didn't want to use that word. Like, I was like, oh, don't do it.
For any philosophy nerds, you'll know why we won't go into that rabbit hole. But
I was like, this is too pretentious already. Like, as soon as you say authentic, you've just lost the room.
I mean, I guess like this is where I struggle. So you can be that sort of cheesy and pretentious when you talk about yoga and like meditation, but as soon as you go into philosophy, people are like, oh no, that's like too deep.
That's what I want to know. Is it like, is it pretentious to completely dismiss philosophy and poetry and literature, like serious literature, straight off the bat?
Yeah.
And just be like, yeah, no.
Yeah. It is.
Which is the thing that happens now. This is why we end up with instant poets and like all of that kind of
I don't want to shit on it because I consume it. So like I
no,
can't.
No, I'll take that. I'll wear that one. That's all me. I'm kind of really happy that shit on them.
But it's true. I mean, I was faced with this when like my publicist was like, we should put quotes of your book on your Instagram, and I was like, but they're all contextual. This is like the critical thinking. I'm like, you cannot separate it from the context because then the like meaning is lost. And she's like, it's gonna sound controversial no matter how I cut it, because like this happened with one of my quotes where I said I was talking about what men want from women, and I was using that Malcolm Gladwell quote of, everybody wants strong black coffee or something like that, and guys being like, I want my woman of my dreams to be independent and strong and funny and smart, and then like you actually feel like you're that person, and that the guys around you end up choosing people who are like somehow like broken and that they can fix. Anyway, this was like my experience in one particular moment in time. I disagree with like 80% of what I said in that chapter now, and I probably disagreed with it like 5 minutes after I wrote it, but that doesn't change the fact that I lived that feeling and that's how I felt in that moment. And when I put up that quote on Instagram, people were like, well, you can't just say that. And I'm like, well, if you read the book, I don't actually just say that. But we've become accustomed to just like taking whatever snack biteable information we've been given and just like run with it and feel angry and feel like all of these emotions that are natural. But if you insert critical thinking and if you make it something that you always question, or if you insert doubt into everything that you see, hear, or say, a lot of it goes away. Right? I mean, am I making sense?
No, but that's okay.
I'm not making sense?
No, you made sense. I mean, it has to do with time as well. It's because time is so... Well, time is finite. There's nothing deep in that. But we live our lives at a fast pace, and these things take time.
Time is money.
It's all about earning those stacks. Well, it's not even about earning the stacks. It's about appearing to have the stacks.
Yes.
And that's a various. Yeah.
Yes.
It's about appearing a certain way. It's all about the facade. There's no depth.
No, and this is sort of, it goes back to the question of what you gonna do with your book once you wrote it, or like what profit are you gonna take from it, or what kind of sales are you hoping to achieve, or all those sort of like very capitalistic questions that people ask you, even if your project is artistic. And that appearance now, I've got messages from people like in the last couple of weeks, because my book's been out for a month, and for an indie, crowdfunded book, it's been selling pretty well. And people are like, oh, so like, congrats, it's such a, and I'm like, you didn't give a fuck while, it didn't look like I was making it. Now that it looks like I'm making it, or like my Instagram looks professional, people are like, you're killing it, girl. And I'm like, no. I was killing it when I was in Belgrade, still persevering against all odds to finish it. Now I'm just being like a clog in the machine trying to fucking sell something. When like the only thing I want to do is actually sit down with people who read it to have an in-depth conversations about the questions I still don't have answers to. Yeah.
I mean, it's like, so I've got this example that I try to use. Now I'm starting to try not to speak to people about this because it's stuff like this, because except you're my exception.
Yeah.
But, because, it's difficult stuff to talk about, but I've got an example of a painter. So we got a painter who's trying to start out, an artist who's trying to start out, and then to get by, they paint just sceneries of wherever they are, but just really quickly, really cheaply, and then they flip them, and they flip them, and they flip them, and they flip them on the side of a main street somewhere. And then at some point they come to this realization that this isn't art, this isn't what I'm like, this is what I'm meant to be doing. Yeah. And then so they stop to work on one piece, which takes time, and so they have a period of time where they're just working on this one piece. But everyone they know comes up to them and goes, "Oh, why don't you paint anymore? Like, why don't you like?" And
yes.
Like, no. And then and even when you explain, and even when you explain it to them, it's just the fact that one, there has to be a physical object, and that two, that physical object has to turn a monetary profit.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunately the culture that we live in now.
Yeah.
And it's just grim.
I mean, it is, because at the same time, like, I'm sure I can write things that I'm passionate about that are like 1 page long and that belong on, like the snackable information media that we use, and I'm sure I can, but I don't want to. Because my whole point is that, we need to take more time to ask ourselves what is good for us and what we want for ourselves. And like, like, stupid example, but, the first one that jumps to mind is, personally, my book is about, fucking a lot of people, because I enjoy fucking a lot of people, and it doesn't hurt me so far. It might one day, it hasn't yet. But conversely, I know a lot of my friends should never behave like that, because that is harmful to them. They get attached, or they, seek other things in that moment of like physical intimacy. Whereas for me, it's just like it's like eating a really nice meal or having a really good glass of wine. It fulfills the same need. But if your need is greater than that and you don't take the time to address it, you're going to like work within like a social prescribed script that doesn't actually do anything for you, and you're constantly going to feel frustrated and lonely and sad because you don't know why you're not getting what you want by enacting the script that you've been taught. And I think I think that's why, that any creative is sort of faced with exactly the same problem as the painter. It's like, when do you're like, but at least I'm painting, even though it's like sceneries that aren't what I want to paint. At least I'm not, washing dishes or something completely creative less. But that's not a word, but you know what I mean. And
stick a hyphen in there, it's a word.
Exactly. But at the same time, it's like those navigating those expectations that you have, from others and just more simply from yourself is something that we don't talk about, or like we do, but in a very like, oh, that's hard, move on, like don't go into that scary topic. Like, just veer.
Well, that's why CBT is so popular.
What's
because
CBT?
All it is like cognitive behavioral
therapy.
Cognitive behavior therapy. Because all it is like, so you've got these deep-rooted problems of anxiety and dread. Have you tried not thinking about them? And it's just, and that's like one of the things I find funny is kind of how Western Zen is all about not thinking about anything, when actual Zen is about staring into the abyss and figuring it out.
Yeah.
It's just kind of, and it's just like, it just should be, it's Western Buddhism or Western Zen, whatever you want to,
Yeah.
But, I mean, all of that sounds grim, because it is a little bit grim, and it's hard. And that's why we don't do it.
But the silver lining is that, if you swipe right on Tinder accidentally, you might meet like your Matthew and like have someone to have these deep conversations with if you need them.
Oh, God. Poor Tinder users everywhere.
No, but I mean, like, I'm still trying not to like fall under the grimness of it, because like, yes, feminism isn't feminism if it isn't intersectional, and yes, art isn't art if it's not fulfilling like your greater purpose, or like all of these like blanket statements that are like, this is the perfect form, sort of like aim towards it. I like what they are, and I don't think feminism is feminism unless it's intersectional. But at the same time, like give people the credit and the time for the process. Of like one step at a time, like look into this, and like you were saying, oh, I read Marx, so therefore next step I read this, and like that process in itself is so important, and it takes time. And if someone's going down that path, like don't find always like the negative start. And this is sort of like the bad side of critical theory of like of shutting everything down. And I think that was like one of my biggest frustrations in the beginning of university, is being like, well, I'm finding a lot of things that don't work, or I'm like deconstructing a lot, but what am I constructing? As if this thought is so far ingrained that you have to build something.
Yes. I mean, with critical theory and philosophy, what we're trying to do is formulate the right questions, which means you always have to be questioning what happened before, and and so you test stuff down all the time, so you tear it to the ground to see what it is,
left,
what the ground is that it stood on, and if there's something there. And it's frustrating, but that's what you do. I suppose with the people seem to have a hard time seeing how it's applicable to everyday life.
Yes.
And like so much of it is I just did the way to get you to question everything in itself is, but like with Marx, there's like a kind of there's a Richard Wolff quote that I kind of like, I'm going to paraphrase, where he says something along the lines of like, how can you formulate a loving relationship if you've been brought up in a construct in a society where you're constantly either ripping off or being ripped off?
Yeah.
Like you can't live your life in these little boxes.
Yeah.
Everything's holistic. You can't. So if you're getting ripped off because of your wage or because of like like the rent thing that's going on in San Francisco at the moment. And Chicago and everywhere else, and all of the like minority and working class neighborhoods being priced out. Like, how can, if someone lives in that dichotomy of either being ripping off or being ripped off, how can they not take that into
every single relationship?
Into everything. Yeah. And so that's why a lot of people can't formulate these strong emotional bonds.
Yes.
And so if we read Marx, and not saying that Marx is 100% correct, because he's not, but if we read it, then it opens up the dialogue to possibly like either push it further forward or figure this out and just and that's why it's important, because it does filter into everything.
Exactly, and this is why I wanted to, tape this podcast episode with you, is because we're not talking about philosophy on like a high level of like, this is the books you should read or this is what these guys say. It's like we're actually using the stuff that we quote unquote learned from those readings into our daily lives, and it affects every decision we make and every feeling we have. Like, I am constantly being like, okay, like, I'm feeling lonely right now. Why? Where does it come from? I'm surrounded with people, yet I feel lonely. Or I'm by myself and I feel perfectly fulfilled. Like, where do those things come from? And how does my environment influence how I feel? And that questioning itself wasn't taught to me by my parents or by any social, surrounding that I was sort of like landed into by the, fortune of my birth. Like, that was entirely thanks to, I hate the word, but like intellectual, like a privilege that I have, because I went to university and I was, given the opportunity to spend 4 years and live in some kind of like bubble of what do you think, and having the privilege of not having to build something or make a tangible object, or, that was like for me the ultimate luxury, is going to university and spending those 4 years doing something quote unquote unproductive for society.
Yeah. And then we also have the privilege and the luxury of time right now. You and I?
Like,
you and I. Again, it's like I was, as we said before, I was an accountant for a bit, and so I was fortunate enough to save some. I shouldn't say accountant, like a bookkeeper.
Yeah.
I just sat at a computer and pretended to do stuff. Which is basically our economy now. But so I saved my money to come over here to get that citizenship and to write. So I had that luxury. Not everybody has that luxury. That luxury affords me the time to read.
But this is these books. I completely agree with you, while entirely disagreeing with you for another reason, is that, yes, I was also a corporate headhunter for 3 years, which, I made a lot of money, and then I saved it. And, I didn't save it to do this, because that wasn't the plan. And if you read the book, you'll know how I ended up here. But basically over the last 2 years, I've worked like in a sort of like paying for food job for maybe 6 months total. And like odd jobs and 3-week contracts and 2-month contracts and stuff like that. I drove a truck last year for, it's just like an example. But basically I agree that, yes, I was fortunate to have a good job, and therefore quote unquote good job financially, that allowed me now to have the time to do this project and have the resources to, do what I wanted to do. But at the same time, it's a choice. It is not just luck. Like, yes, it's luck to be, within an economic background that I can get a good job thanks to my university, thanks to the privilege, blah, blah. But at the same time, I could still be working that job and being like, I don't have a choice. I have to pay my rent. I decided to quit my job, to take the risk, and to actually force myself to fight society and my family and my friends who didn't understand why I was doing this and why I wasn't, you're nearing your 30s. Why aren't you thinking about your future? Why don't you keep saving so that if something happens, I was like, something is happening. I want to do this. This is what I want to do. And so I think, yes, there is a bit of luck, but there is also, I hate when I'm in Switzerland at the moment where I'm from, and everyone's like, you're so lucky. I'm like, you live in Switzerland. You have a Swiss salary. Like, you cannot tell me that I am lucky. Like, you all have the same opportunity in this scenario. The people that I was talking to, they all have the same opportunity. Like, but I have like bills to pay. I'm like, I had bills to pay. I paid my bills for years. I just chose to take a different path, which is just as doable if you apply yourself. If not harder, like maybe not mentally harder, because having a 9-to-5 is, really hard on my brain anyway. But at the same time, I think you have to recognize that those decisions are just as hard, and it's not always about the privilege. If you're already talking to privileged people, like this is like a big parentheses, but do you agree?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminds me of I met this guy in Sarajevo who read some of this stuff, but was very much more right wing.
Good time.
I say that because I'm nowhere near the right. I can't. As my brother likes to say, you're so far left you can't even see the center anymore. But anyway. He basically come down to, after a discussion, he was saying that there's poor people should read more, and then they would understand how to take their freedom, and it just doesn't work like that. I mean, if you're down in the coal mine, or you're working in some factory knitting sweaters in Vietnam, you're not going 60 hours a week.
At least.
Upwards.
Yeah.
You're not going to have the time to sit there and try and comb through this, and this is why television works. All you want to do is come and watch people vaguely similar to you have a slightly more quote unquote interesting existence.
Well, this is why I was trying to preface the fact that I'm talking about people coming from the same place of privilege, which is not being inclusive, because but at the same time, like I said in other episodes, this is my own personal lived experience, and I can't speak for others, and I'm happy, if anyone wants to come and talk to me or Matthew or all of us about their experiences from a different background, I am so keen to have that conversation, because I just don't feel comfortable having that conversation for others. But yeah. So anyway, the point here was that, life is hard.
Just smile and keep pushing that boulder up the hill.
Oh God, yeah. Whatever your boulder looks like, just keep at it. I believe in you. You can do this.
It is hard.
But should we say something uplifting to end this episode?
Please. Otherwise,
impending doom, guys. Wallow in it. It's kind of nice.
If you knew me, this was uplifting.
Yes, Matthew was very concerned about his monotone speaking voice. But I think we managed to keep a sense of humor through this. But yes, please tweet at us, Instagram, whatever medium you want to choose. Say what you have to say. Disagree with us all you want. We're here to do that. So, and if you have suggestions for other shit that we should be talking about, holla. So anyway, this was Running Wild with Christine. Sex, success, and other slippery rabbit holes. Thanks so much, Matthew, for taking the time.
Thank you.
And we'll speak to you soon, lovers. Bye now.
The podcast you just heard was recorded with Anchor. If you want to make your own, download the Android or iOS app completely free from anchor.fm/podcast. That's anchor.fm/podcast.